Cold wets for me mean seasonal dishes like soups, casseroles, and veggie or meat pies. Chicken pot pie is a common comfort food in American culture. Chicken, veggies in a souped up, flavorful suprême sauce, which is a cross between béchamel and a velouté, and baked in a pie crust creates quite the hearty dish. Throw in some homemade yeast rolls and I'm a happy camper. Pot pies can be easy to make. I prefer from scratch baking and cooking, so this recipe focuses mainly on homemade ingredients, including my own poultry seasoning. However, you can make this recipe in no time using pre-made pie crusts, rotisserie chicken, and a commercial poultry seasoning. Let's check it out. I've been making versions of this recipe for years and we just love it. I'm excited to share this one with you, going rustic all the way to make it easier and fun. For the ingredients, you'll need 2 unbaked pie crusts. I'm using a homemade shortening base, cooked shredded or ground chicken or turkey, all-purpose flour, poultry seasoning, salt, black pepper, oil, onion, garlic, frozen mixed vegetables, 1 medium russet potato, mushrooms, butter, chicken broth, milk, and any kind of melting shredded cheese. I'm using Colby Jack. Preheat the oven to 425 degrees, and we're gonna begin by making the pot pie filling. To a small bowl, we're gonna add 40 grams, which is 1/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour, 5 grams, 1 tablespoon of poultry seasoning. I'm using my homemade version, which is linked in the description below, 6 grams, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper. Just stir until it's all mixed up and then set it aside. To a large skillet on medium-high heat, we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of a neutral oil. I'm using avocado oil here. You can use whatever you have. I'm gonna let that heat up and we're gonna saute our vegetables. Make sure you swirl the oil around in the pan. Once your oil is heated and you know it's warm enough, when you place a bit of onion in the oil and the onion sizzles around where it's sitting in the oil, you're gonna add 1/2 of a small onion. This onion is diced and all of my vegetables are cut about the same size. We're gonna let the onion cook for about 2 to 4 minutes until it's soft. The onions have softened when they turn a little translucent. Then we're gonna add 2 cloves of minced garlic, and we're just gonna cook the garlic for about a minute just to burn off some of that strong garlic scent and taste. We're gonna add 130 grams, which is about 1 cup of frozen vegetables. Any kind that you like is fine here. 175 grams, which is 1 cup or 1 medium diced potato, again about the same size dice as the other vegetables. And 100 grams, which is 1 cup of diced mushroom. If you don't like any of these specific vegetables, then pick any vegetable that you do like and just make sure you have 3 cups total of vegetables in the skillet. So you can leave out the potato and you can leave out the mushrooms if you'd rather have something else. We're gonna add a pinch of salt, as layering the salt is always good in cooking. You get a little bit of salt in the layers as opposed to having to add a lot at the end. We're gonna cook all the vegetables now until they are soft. Once your vegetables are soft, you can always test the potato because it takes the longest to cook. And then once those are soft, and that means everything else is ready, and then just set your vegetables aside and turn off the heat. Let's make the sauce suprême. So in a large saucepan, we're gonna add 76 grams, which is 1/3 of a cup of butter. And I like to dice my butter so that it melts more quickly. You're gonna heat the butter on medium-high heat. Once the butter is melted, we're gonna whisk in the flour mixture. And you wanna whisk consistently for at least a minute, minute and a half or so, because we want to burn off that pasty flour flavor. You can turn the heat down as you go. The flour is what's going to thicken our sauce. And in the sauce you can see the poultry seasoning. That's what that dark coloring is. Okay, now we're gonna add in 420 milliliters, which is 1 3/4 of a cup of chicken broth or chicken stock or whatever you have. Vegetable would be fine too. You wanna stir as you go. And then to that, we're also going to add 160 milliliters, which is 2/3 of a cup of milk. I'm using whole milk. I like the richness of the whole milk, but you can use whatever milk you have on hand. And then we're just going to whisk pretty consistently. You can lower your heat to low medium and continue to whisk while simmering. And we want this to thicken. It will take 5 to 15 minutes. And I know that seems like a large span of time, but it depends on the temperature of your liquids. The mixture will thicken more quickly if you pour in warm broth and milk. So I heat my broth and milk up separately in the microwave so that when I add it to the mixture, it only takes about 5 minutes instead of 15. If you put your liquids in cold, it's going to take a lot longer for them to heat up and to thicken. You could also heat them both up together on the stove if you'd like, and then just pour it into your flour mixture when ready. Whisk frequently so that your milk doesn't burn, and check the thickness as you go. A mixture is certainly thickened, and it's really took me less than 5 minutes because everything was warm when I added it. You can tell if it's thick enough by running your spoon through the sauce, and when you lift the spoon up, notice that the sauce clings to the spoon. That means it is thick enough. To the sauce, we're gonna add 113 grams, which is 1 cup of cheese. You can use any type of cheese or mix of cheeses that you like, preferably a melting cheese of some kind. I'm just using Colby Jack. I've used cheddar and mozzarella. Give that a quick stir. You can go ahead and turn off the heat too. The sauce is warm enough to melt the cheese. Then we're gonna add 1 pound of shredded cooked meat. You can use ground meat like chicken or turkey. Chicken thighs would be really good here because the extra fat in that would just add more indulgence to this dish. You could use a rotisserie chicken and just shred it. And then we're gonna add the vegetables. And you can use any type of vegetable that you like. These are our preferred vegetables, that's why I'm using these. And then give it all a stir. Oh, look at that nice cheesy dish. Once you've stirred it, give it a taste and see if you need to add more salt, pepper, or seasoning. We're gonna set the mixture aside and let it cool slightly before we add it to our pie crust. Take one of your pie crusts and roll it out to about 12 inches, and then you're going to need either a 9 to 10 inch pie plate or a 1.5 to 2 quart casserole dish. I like to use a deep casserole dish for my chicken pot pies because I like the double crust with a thick, runny center. So I guess it's more of a casserole than a pie in this case. Nevertheless, you do see pot pies in either a pie plate or a casserole dish. And this is an ungreased dish. So just take your pie crust and place it in whatever dish you're using. Looks like I tore my pie crust, but it's okay if you do because this is the bottom one anyway. So you can just form it to the dish. Shape your pie crust to the dish. It's okay if it hangs over the top just a little bit. You're gonna take a metal baking sheet and I put foil on it. I bake my pie on top of this in case any crust falls off or any filling oozes out. It'll land on the foil and on the sheet instead of on my oven floor. We're gonna blind bake the crust because we don't want the liquid filling to keep the crust soft and mushy, so we want it cooked somewhat par-baked before we add the filling. So I take a sheet of parchment paper because it makes it easy to form inside of my pie dough here. Just sit it in the pie dough, form it along the sides and the bottom because we don't want the pie crust to bubble up when it's baking, so I find this is a fairly easy method. And then you can use pie weights or dried beans or dried rice, and you just want to cover the bottom. I'm using dried pinto beans, and I've been using these beans for years as my pie weights. I just put them back in the bag when they've cooled. Okay, so you can see that now the bottom is covered. And I cut off any excess dough that was hanging out well below the edge of the casserole dish. We're gonna par-bake the crust for 10 to 15 minutes until the dough is no longer raw, but still pale. After removing the par-baked crust from the oven, go ahead and just lift up the beans or the weights that you have in your parchment paper. Notice how easily that comes up. Take a quick look at your par-baked pie crust. If it doesn't look dry and it looks a little bit raw, put it back in the oven without the pie weights for about 2 minutes, and that should dry it out so that you can actually fill it now. So notice that your pie crust will shrink a bit from the top, so that's why you want it a little bit over the top edge. As it bakes, it's going to shrink. That's exactly what I'm looking for, because we're going to lay another one on top, so we don't want it overhanging. If you do have some that are overhanging, just take a knife while this is still hot and trim off the edge to where it's pretty flush at the top. And then go ahead and reduce your oven down to 350 degrees. That's the temperature at which we're going to bake our pot pie. So now with the cheese that we had left over that we measured out, this is the remaining 56 grams or about a half a cup. We're actually going to put this at the bottom of our pot pie, because it's also going to act as about a seal between the liquid ingredients and the crust, because we really want that crust not to be mushy and soft, and it makes it a little extra cheesy. Now we're going to take our cooled filling and we're just going to scoop it over the top of the cheese. This should still be warm. You can make the filling the day before if you would like, and put it in the refrigerator and then just heat it up before you put it in the pie. You don't want that cold filling in the pie because it'll take longer for your pie to cook. And we just want to fill this up. There have been times when I actually had a little bit extra too much meat or too many vegetables, and I had too much filling. If you do, just save the rest and you can eat it as is because it's already cooked, right? Okay, fills up my little casserole dish. Take your second pie crust, roll it out 10 to 12 inches, just depending on how big your dish is, whether it's a pie plate or a casserole. And then we're going to gently place it over the pie casserole dish. This is the rustic part. So if you want to make it look pretty, go ahead, trim off the edges, flute it like you would pie, or just leave it like this. This is going to be extra crust that we can eat with the pot pie, and we don't have to cut it off during the baking. It'll bake perfectly for the duration of the pie. So I'm just going to leave it draped over like this. You can adjust it if you need to, just a smidge. If one side's longer than the other. Take a look around. It's just hanging over it. If you love crust, this is a great way to keep from wasting that crust. But we do need to allow air vents at the top. So take a knife and then you can just cut in just 3 to 4 vents through your crust. If you wanted to do a pretty flower or leaf or something, but again, we're going rustic. We're not wasting any time adding anything special to this. This is going to be yummy as it is. We don't even need to add an egg wash. It's going to bake up nicely. I have found that using a shortening pie crust works a little bit better than a combination of butter and shortening, or just butter, because shortening has less liquid in it than butter does, and the butter, as it heats up, it starts to separate and the pie crust starts to fall off, which would be okay, because then you just have pie crust to pick up off the baking sheet when you eat your pie. So it doesn't really matter if it stays on or if it falls off, but I do find that a shortening crust works a little bit better. It stays more intact. Place the pie in the oven to bake for 50 minutes or until the crust is golden brown. Check it out, it's out of the oven. Now that it's baked, we're going to allow the pie to sit for 15 minutes to cool and set before we cut and serve. Now look, for the most part, it has definitely that rustic look. The crust held on for the most part. We did have one little section where it fell off, but that's just going to go right into the pie as we eat it. Extra crust, can't go wrong with that. Closer look, definitely get that rustic edge to it. Of course, you could trim off the pie crust a little bit if you didn't want it hanging over that much, or just don't roll it out as much as I did. So you've got plenty of options, but the point is we get to eat the crust, all of it. We don't have to waste it, we don't have to throw it away, we don't have to cook it separately, we can just cook it with this. Rustic, that's what we want here. And even if the crust falls off, look at that, it's perfectly baked. It doesn't need any less time than what the pie was cooked for. With the vent slits at the top, there was no oozing out of the filling, and we didn't have any to run out onto our baking sheet here. Let's try it. Now remember, we've got 2 crusts here. This is meant to be runny, so it's going to ooze as soon as we start to pull out the pie piece here. Try to get both the top and bottom crust So you can see the inside there starting to ooze down. You can see the bottom, so we got some of the bottom pie crust out of there. And that's what we have this for. You could break it off and serve it on the side with it for extra crust. You can spot many of the vegetables, the chicken pieces, mushrooms. Of course, you got the crust on the top and the bottom. So you've got all that filling with extra crust to go with it. And that's, to me, is what makes a chicken pot pie. Is not necessarily the pie filling, which I absolutely love, but the crust that goes on top and bottom, oh, it just makes it indulgent. Gives you something bready with something so runny and creamy to go with it. So it's just a nice balance of both the crust and the filling. Crust is crispy. The crust adds texture and flavor. The hearty potato adds a bit of texture too and a bite. The ooey gooey filling, just all of that incredible smooth, just sort of melts in your mouth. I get several vegetables. The chicken is well balanced with the flavoring of the sauce. The poultry seasoning, I think, is the perfect amount in here. The salt is perfect as well. It's just, there's so much flavor bursting on just that single little bite. The poultry seasoning just has so many spices in it that you just get a hit of just all sorts of flavors. The cheese adds richness, but doesn't really contribute to the sauce other than it really just thickens it, and it also gives it just a little bit of richness. I love the extra pie crust on the side. We will definitely enjoy this for several days. Serve chicken pot pie along with a salad, roasted vegetables, yeast rolls, biscuits, cornbread, or whatever your heart desires. For us, this is comfort food on a cold winter day, especially with its rustic look. It just makes me feel just nice and cozy inside. In the recipe linked below, I provide substitutions for making this from scratch recipe a little easier if time is a problem and there are vegetarian options for non-meat eaters. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. Until next time, enjoy this last bit of winter before spring by making a pot pie and go bake the world.